He does a tremendous job covering all of the things with the drafts. The breakdown has been great from the Inquirer. It's Mr. Devin Jackson. You should experience the new look of Inquirer Sports, where fans can read, watch, and listen to their favorite reporters and columnists. Go to Inquirer.com/sports. How you doing today, Devin?
Doing great. Heading up to Green Bay and getting ready to take in an NFL draft. So looking forward to being there on the ground and taking it all in, and just a few days away and ready for night one to start.
Absolutely. So I mentioned to the audience, the first thing I want to ask you is, what do you think the odds are? What do you think the percentage chance is that the Eagles end up just staying at 32, not moving up, not moving down? Is that 51%, a little lower, a little higher? What do you think the odds are that the Eagles just stay at 32 and take the best player available?
I would say about 35%. I think it's a little less than half, just because it feels like it's one of those drafts where they might get aggressive and move up a few spots to get the player they want. But I can also see them deciding to trade back. I know last time that we talked about the depth of the draft being from like 30 to 80, like 30 to 85. So I think you're going to be able to find a good player if you decide to trade back a few spots, and if the team wants to get up to take a quarterback or offensive lineman. So I think the Eagles are in a good spot either way that they go. But I would be surprised if they ended up staying at 32, especially if a player they like is falling down the board, or if they get up at 32 and there's not a lot there available that they find value in.
If there are any players falling down the board, are there going to be any like Cooper DeJeans or Jordan Davises that fell down for different reasons, but were pretty much should have been picked a lot higher than they were? Are there any players like that in this draft?
Yeah. I think there's going to be a few players that end up maybe falling a little bit more than we expect. Who that will be interesting to see. I think, like a player that comes to mind is like Josh Simmons, offensive tackle from Ohio State, and maybe the Eagles aren't necessarily interested in getting him, but I could see him falling. He's coming off a torn patellar tendon, and just one of those guys that you can't really tell what the exact range for him is. So I would say, of any player in the first round that maybe is kind of all over the place being mocked, I think Josh Simmons kind of fits that bill as a player that, maybe he'll go a little bit lower than people are expecting with him coming off the knee injury.
Devin, last time we spoke to you, you were clear that you thought that defensive tackle was the deepest position in the draft, and that happens to be a position where the Eagles are maybe short bodies. Do you think that that's the position that they most hope to draft? I know they're probably going to stay true to their board and go best available. Right now, if they were thinking about which position we would most like to add to the team, do you think it would be defensive tackle, or would it be another position like safety, tight end, edge rusher, where they're also thin bodies, offensive linemen? Where do you think they would like to go if everything went perfect for them?
Yeah, I think if everything went perfect, I think defensive line, just because I feel like Walter Nolan is such a great pick for them and would fit exactly what they're looking for in a player, explosiveness, power, and really kind of filling that role that left behind by Milton Williams. But I would put safety as a close second, just because there's so much uncertainty, behind, Reed Blankenship. Sidney Brown is in the mix, but I really feel like they're going to draft a safety within the first couple rounds of the draft, and I would say that's a close second in terms of where I think they would like to find, maybe a starter level player at that position. So I would say defensive line, safety, and then they're always going to take an offensive lineman. I think that's always been a big value for them, but I don't think they're necessarily looking for a starter along the offensive line. Just with Tyler Steen being there, Kenyon Green getting traded and coming into Philly. So I'm sure they would like to add, some competition for the position, but overall I think defensive line and safety will be the two areas I think they find a way to address early in the draft.
Now, if they were after, you brought up the safety position, if they were after that starting type safety right off the bat, you have a guy like Malachi Starks, how high up would they have to move to get him?
I think probably in the early to mid 20s, and I think that's just about the range that feels like is right for Malachi Starks. I think his range starts probably around 14 with the Colts, but I doubt the Colts will be taking him that early in the draft. But when you start getting in the 20s, early 20s to mid 20s, teams like the Vikings, I think, would love to have a guy like Malachi Starks in their defense and Brian Flores' defense. as a potential fit. I'd look at a few of their spots in the 20s as well, and the Los Angeles Rams being a team that could be a Malachi Starks team, Baltimore Ravens. So I think once you get into the mid 20s to late 20s, that's where his range really starts to heat up. And if you really want to go and get him, I think that's where you'll have to hop some of those teams, probably the Vikings or the Rams, to go up and get him.
We're speaking with Devin Jackson. He does a tremendous job covering all things with the draft for the Inquirer. He's headed up to Green Bay now. I want to ask you about the Eagles secondary. You mentioned safety. There's also, I guess, some questions at corner because you lose both Slay and Isaiah Rodgers. So you also lost a lot of bodies in that room unless they really like Eli Ricks. Is corner a spot where they may need to go, maybe not early in the draft, but address at some point via the draft due to losing two guys that were starting caliber from last year?
Yeah, I think so. I think, especially with kind of the depth behind those positions too, not too expensive. I would definitely see them, maybe early on day 3, 4th or 5th round pick on a corner, or maybe a guy that's a little bit more versatile. Jacob Parrish for Kansas State would make a lot of sense. They brought him in on a pre-draft visit, and he's a guy that can play, both the nickel and outside corner spot, but probably is more of a nickel type at the NFL level. And then Jalen Smith, who they brought in for a pre-draft visit as well from USC, has played safety, corner, and nickel at the college level with USC. And I think those two guys would make a lot of sense if you want to go more of the day 3 route. And there's going to be some other guys, too, that have a little bit of that flexibility. I know for the Eagles, they want guys that can play multiple spots and have some value. And, I think the Avonte Maddox departure, too, will have an impact on the secondary because he was able to play so many different spots for the Eagles. So I would expect them to – maybe they won't get a necessarily true outside starting corner, but at least some depth players and some guys that can play multiple spots in the secondary.
Obviously, with the possible departure of Dallas Goedert, what are your thoughts on tight end and where they could possibly pick one up in the draft?
Yeah, tight end is going to be an interesting one because I think, obviously Tyler Warren and Colson Loveland are the two top guys in this draft, and I think they're going to go inside the top 20. So then, it becomes a game of who's going to go off the board next. And, I think Mason Taylor is obviously in that discussion, Elijah Arroyo from Miami as well. As guys, and then maybe if you go the later on day 2 option, there's Terrence Ferguson from Oregon and Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green. So I think for the Eagles, it makes a lot of sense in their second pick to be more maybe towards a tight end, maybe their third pick. One of their picks in the second or third round makes a lot of sense. Now, who will be there will be an interesting one. With the Eagles, if they decide to trade back from 32, would a guy like Mason Taylor in the 40s make a lot of sense? I think they certainly are interested in him and has shown some interest in him in the pre-draft process, even though he hasn't taken a pre-draft visit with the Eagles. But when you just think about where they are right now, I could see them at least on one of their day 2 picks using one on a tight end and finding a guy that can add some more talent to that tight end room. And I know they added a few guys in free agency, but I think they could definitely use another body and some talent in that room, assuming that Dallas Goedert won't be returning.
Last thing I want to ask you about, Devin, and we appreciate your time. We've heard some rumblings. I saw your back and forth you did for the Inquirer.com with E.J. Smith as well. Running back and wide receiver are some spots where there's not necessarily a lot of depth. Obviously, they invested heavily in both those spots financially so they could use some young talent. Day 3, are any names maybe at wide receiver or running back we should maybe be looking for because it's rumored that they would be looking there later in the draft?
Yeah, I think the obvious one for running back at least is Jaden Blue, the running back from Texas. An explosive player, a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield, really is a one cut and go runner. Has a lot of speed down the field. But another guy I like as a running back is Kyle Monangai, the Rutgers running back, who is a really good pass protector, not exactly the fastest running back, but very efficient in his movements. And, I think his third down ability, especially pass blocking wise, is going to be valuable to potentially, find a role with the Eagles. So those are two running backs that I would look at as potential options. Now, in terms of receivers, I think you probably want to go maybe more of a slot receiver type. So, one guy that I really like that maybe, like 6-7 round pick is the pit receiver Kanata Monkfield, who I think has some really good separation at the line of scrimmage, some really reliable hands, and a guy that really hasn't been connected with the Eagles, but I feel like, just with some of the other needs that they have, if they do draft a receiver, I think it'll be late in that 6-7 round area. So I think Monkfield will be a guy that makes a lot of sense, that can maybe compete for a roster spot and whatnot. But I'd be surprised if they use one of their, 3-4 round picks on receiver just because of, like you said, the resources they have in that room already invested and to some of the other needs that they have along the defensive front.
Well, Devin, we really appreciate you spending some time. Safe travels, man, out there. We love everything that you do, all the great work, and everybody should be reading it at Inquirer.com/sports. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate the time.
All right. That was Devin Jackson right there from the Inquirer. So Jacob Parrish, corner. Jalen Smith, corner. And then Manung guy would make me and Dylan as Rutgers guys very happy as a running back. And the other part, our own Andrew DeCecco was at his pro day. There were multiple Eagles reps up at Rutgers for the pro day for him because they weren't up there scouting anybody else. So that's a pick that I think might actually be somewhat realistic. They're very familiar with that kid, and he was the Rutgers' whole offense. They couldn't pass. They got bowl eligible in the back of that kid. So he must have something in him. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching. Really appreciate it. If you want more of this content, make sure you like and subscribe. And you can do that kind of over here if you want more of the best show ever.